What if I told you that one man armed not with tanks or treaties, but with raw conviction, is attempting to rewrite Africa's future in real time? Burkina Faso's president, Ibrahim Traoré, has just announced a plan so radical, so seismic, it could tear through the very fabric of colonial borders. One government, one currency, one passport for the entire continent of Africa, not in 2050, not in the distant dreams of Pan-African theorists. But now, this isn't diplomacy. This is revolution dressed as policy. What Traoré said on that blood-red stage in Ouagadougou wasn't just a speech, it was a thunderclap, heard from the shores of Dakar to the streets of Nairobi. And it demands your attention. Subscribe if you believe the African awakening has already begun. Stay to the end. This is the kind of story that changes history. On Juillet 28, 2025, during a National Address broadcast live across Burkina Faso, President Ibrahim Traoré declared his vision for a united African continent under one government, one currency called Afro money, and a single African passport. His speech was later verified and reported by African News, Al Jazeera, and Reuters, confirming that the Traoré administration has already formed working groups with Mali and Guinea to explore a continental integration roadmap. The announcement came without warning, bypassing traditional African Union consultation procedures and caught even veteran diplomats by surprise. The Burkina Faso Information Ministry later released a statement reaffirming that this vision is non-negotiable and the foundation of a new African century. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. The sun was unforgiving that afternoon in Ouagadougou, but inside the high-security compound of the People's Palace, the air was electric. Every minister, general, and aide stood motionless as President Ibrahim Traoré walked into the war room, not for battle, but for something far riskier: vision. He placed a single sheet of paper on the mahogany table. No fancy logos, no signatures, just 3 words handwritten in black ink: United African Government. Silence. Then, with a quiet steadiness that has come to define him, Traoré spoke. "Gentlemen, ladies, this is not a request. This is a declaration. Either we unite now, or we perish as pawns." No one dared respond. Not even the senior general who had once served under French command. Not the finance minister who still received IMF correspondence weekly. Because they all knew what Ibrahim Traoré said. He meant Burkina Faso was no longer a satellite state dancing to foreign rhythms. Under Traoré, it had expelled French military presence, cut off World Bank strings, and formed the Alliance of Sahel States, AES, with Mali and Guinea. Now, he was aiming for the unimaginable full continental union, what you see as impossible. He continued, "Our ancestors died believing was inevitable." Across the continent, some dismissed it as political theatre. Others leaned in, uncertain whether this was madness or prophecy. But inside Burkina Faso, something had already shifted. Young engineers at the National Polytechnic Institute began sketching digital infrastructure to connect 54 countries. Language experts convened to standardize a translation system for 2,000 tongues. A temporary unity parliament was assembled with volunteer representatives from 6 nations, all under Traoré's direction. And then came the map. A hand-drawn redesign of the African continent, erased of colonial borders, recolored, not in the flags of old regimes, but in the deep green, black, and gold of unity. He pinned it to the wall. We no longer ask who drew the lines, we ask why we still honor them. That was the day the old Africa began to tremble. AGA. If you believe Traoré's courage is the voice of Africa, share your thoughts in the comments. In the weeks that followed, Traoré's vision took on a life of its own, not in bureaucratic halls, but in the streets, in the music, in the whispered prayers of the old and the loud chants of the young. In Accra, schoolchildren painted murals of a single African flag. In Dar es Salaam, fishermen refused to trade in foreign currencies, demanding Afro money instead. And in Lagos, a viral song titled "One Voice, One Nation" climbed the charts with a chorus that ended simply, "I am not a border, I am Africa." International analysts scrambled to interpret the movement. Western think tanks labeled it naive nationalism. But they underestimated the fire that had already been lit, and behind it all, calmly navigating the storm, stood Ibrahim Traoré. His team, dubbed the Vanguard, operated in secrecy from an underground command center beneath the capital. There, economists, linguists, military strategists, and historians worked side by side, studying how to dismantle centuries of division without collapsing entire economies. The media called it radical, but in Burkina Faso, they called it destiny. Traoré's personal advisor, a woman named Sophia Ouedraogo, once a UN legal scholar, described it best in a leaked interview. He isn't planning for the next election, he's planning for the next civilization. But not everyone was on board. In Kenya, a senior official publicly warned that surrendering national sovereignty could turn smaller countries into zones of neglect. South Africa's foreign minister declared that any continental authority without democratic consensus is dictatorship in disguise. And behind closed doors, ambassadors from former colonial powers asked a more direct question: what if this actually works? Inside Traoré's office, reports showed signs of external sabotage. Cyber attacks traced to overseas servers, disinformation campaigns aimed at discrediting the Afro Money Initiative, and rumors of coup plots circulating in 2 neighboring countries. Yet Traoré remained unmoved. "I was not raised to kneel before doubt," he told his staff during a midnight meeting. "Let them fear, let them lie, but we will not stop. Because this time, Africa is not reacting. Africa is writing the script, and for the first time in generations, that script no longer had a European narrator. IOL. If you believe Traoré's courage is the voice of Africa, share your thoughts in the comments. While the world debated headlines, Ibrahim Traoré was building alliances in silence. In a discreet summit held in the highlands of northern Mali, 3 presidents met under armed guard. No media, no translations, just the raw sound of 3 African tongues, pledging allegiance to a future beyond empires. Mali, Guinea, and Burkina Faso, founders of the Alliance of Sahel States, signed what they called the Pact of Reclamation. It wasn't a trade deal, it was a manifesto. One government, one army, one economy, one future. The language was unapologetic. "We reject the artificial boundaries created by colonial architects," the document read, "and we affirm that Africa belongs to no one but its people." That evening, as the sun dipped behind the Sahel horizon, the 3 leaders stood beneath a black flag stitched with a golden lion, Traoré's personal symbol of strength and defiance. By morning, the pact had reached the streets. In Dakar, young men painted lions across concrete walls. In Yaoundé, university professors held public readings of the manifesto. In Maputo, a retired veteran declared, "This is the Africa I fought for, not what we inherited." Still, the backlash came swift and hard. France summoned its ambassadors for emergency regional reviews. The EU Commission released a thinly veiled warning against illegal consolidation of authority by non-democratic means. Washington issued a statement monitoring the situation with concern, but Traoré did not blink. In a late-night broadcast from Burkina Faso's presidential compound, he looked into the camera not with anger, but with eerie calm. "We are not rebelling, we are returning to ourselves, to our language, to our destiny." That speech would become legendary. Clips circulated worldwide. Hashtags like United Africa and Traoré Truth trended on global platforms. A photo of him holding a child, with the Afro Money symbol etched into her forehead, became iconic, and within days, 4 more countries requested observer status in the alliance. Behind closed doors, Western intelligence agencies sounded alarms. "This isn't rhetoric," one US security analyst warned. "This man has a plan, And worse people are listening. Share this story if you feel you're witnessing history that others are too afraid to acknowledge. Inside the central bank of Burkina Faso, what once served as a satellite node of French fiscal control, a quiet revolution was underway. Technicians dismantled the final CFA franc processing servers. In their place, a new system was installed, Project Afroca, the digital backbone of Afro money. It was more than symbolic. This was the first time in modern history that a West African nation would fully control the creation, valuation, and distribution of its own currency. Free from European pegs and Western oversight, Traoré's top economic advisor, a Ghanaian prodigy named Kojo Mensah, described it as monetary sovereignty reimagined. The Afro money currency wouldn't just be a printed note, it would launch as a digital-first economy, designed for trade, backed by gold and lithium reserves, and stored across a decentralized network spread across 5 allied nations, and it wouldn't be vulnerable to sanctions. Afro money will not kneel to Wall Street or Paris, Kojo declared. It will rise on African ground and circulate in African hands. The IMF called it financially reckless. The French Treasury warned of economic destabilization, but markets in Lagos, Addis Ababa, and Kigali responded differently. Within a month, nearly 80,000 African merchants signed petitions urging their governments to accept Afro money for cross-border trade. On the streets of Ouagadougou, shops began listing prices in 2 currencies, CFA and AFM, Afro money. By month's end, most had stopped using CFA altogether. Still, the external pressure intensified. France froze Burkina Faso's overseas financial accounts. A major European bank blocked transfers from the country. The World Bank paused all future lending, but Traoré had planned for this. In a historic live address to the African diaspora broadcast simultaneously in French, English, Arabic, and Swahili, he made his stance crystal clear. Let them freeze what they do not own. We have wealth in our soil. We have youth in our streets. We are not asking for aid. We are demanding dignity. He paused, and with or without permission, Afro money will flow. That night, across Burkina Faso, citizens lit lanterns and hung them in their windows. In quiet solidarity, in open rebellion, they called it the Night of No Masters. If you believe this is the kind of leadership Africa was waiting for, hit the like button and share Traoré's story. But currency was just the beginning. The next move would strike even deeper at the heart of African identity: borders. Within weeks of Afro money's rollout, Traoré unveiled the final pillar of his vision. Not economic, not military, human. A single African passport. No more visas between Burkina Faso, Mali, Guinea, or any state ready to join. No more embassies policing movement between brothers and sisters. Just one document, one identity, citizen of Africa. When he presented the prototype at a press conference in Bamako, it was not a polished document. It was leather-bound, simple, with a sunburst crest and the phrase, "I am Africa." The hall fell silent before bursting into applause. People wept, and within hours, the image went viral. Across Nairobi, Johannesburg, Cairo, Dakar, Africans posted their reactions. Some skeptical, most hopeful. A Kenyan nurse tweeted, "I've waited my whole life to visit my grandmother's grave in Togo. Maybe now I can." A Burkinabe farmer commented, "I haven't seen my brother in Côte d'Ivoire in 20 years. What war separated us? Only paper." Traoré wasn't just removing bureaucracy, he was resurrecting kinship. And it wasn't just symbolic. His government launched the reunification program, funding transportation for families divided by colonial borders. Buses and trains packed with passengers rolled across once militarized crossings to cheers and celebrations. Soldiers didn't stop them, they saluted. But as always, there was pushback. Nigeria's National Security Council raised concerns about unregulated movement of extremist groups. South Africa's parliament argued that without coordinated immigration policy, a single passport would invite economic imbalance. And behind the scenes, whispers began: who appointed Ibrahim Traoré as the voice of all Africa? In Europe, news outlets ran with the narrative: Burkina Faso's strongman seeks to dissolve borders. In Washington, think tanks debated whether this was organic reform or authoritarian overreach. And yet, the people kept moving. No walls, no passports, just footsteps on ancestral land. One BBC reporter asked an elderly woman crossing into Burkina Faso from Ghana how she felt. Her answer was simple: "I'm finally going home without permission." If this story moved something in you, let others hear it, share it, because freedom is not a luxury, it's a birthright. Traoré's passport revolution had ignited something. Few had expected an emotional tsunami. In Cape Town, artists projected holograms of the new African passport onto colonial-era buildings. In Cairo, students organized a candlelight march, chanting in Arabic, "Minbar il-Bar, Wahid," from sea to sea, one. But it was in diaspora communities where the message struck deepest. In Atlanta, Georgia, a hub of African-American consciousness, thousands gathered in Centennial Park to witness a simulcast of Traoré's address to the African Union. Wearing traditional kente, kufis, and Ankara suits, they stood in reverence as the screen came to life. Traoré's face appeared, not filtered through Western media, not sanitized, but raw, direct. To my brothers and sisters in the Americas, the Caribbean, Europe, we see you. Africa is not whole without you. You do not need a visa to return home. You need only the will. The crowd erupted. For many, this was the moment they had longed for. A reversal of history. A spiritual invitation to undo the rupture of the transatlantic slave trade, not just through words, but policy. Burkina Faso's embassies across Europe and North America began processing diaspora citizenships. Not symbolic titles, but real documents. Afro passports, Afro money accounts, land grants in revitalized villages, university placement programs for descendants of African slaves. It wasn't perfect, it was barely structured, but it was real. And as news of these programs spread, so did international alarm. A classified NATO memo, later leaked, labeled Traoré's initiatives as a soft unification threat, warning that his movement could reshape global migration patterns and tilt diplomatic loyalties in the global south. China remained silent, but intrigued. Russia praised the boldness. France panicked. And in Washington, US officials feared losing influence in a region rich with minerals and geopolitical leverage. But Traoré, standing before the African Union with only a worn-out binder in hand, made no apologies. They call this rebellion. But we are not rebelling. We are returning. And to those who fear our unity, I ask, why? Then he closed the binder and stepped back from the podium. There was no applause, just silence. The kind of silence that follows an earthquake. If you believe Ibrahim Traoré's vision deserves to be known by the world, don't scroll past. Share this now. It happened quietly, without press releases or podium speeches. On a cold morning in early November, satellite surveillance from European intelligence picked up unusual movement in West Africa. The construction of a vast subterranean complex just outside Ouagadougou. Speculations ran wild: nuclear facilities, weapons caches, Chinese involvement. But what it actually was stunned the world. Burkina Faso had built the African Sovereignty Command Center, ASCC, an independent data, defense, and policy hub shielded from global surveillance networks. The center, developed in cooperation with engineers from Mali, Guinea, and South Sudan, operated on a closed-loop satellite system outside the reach of Western intelligence. For the first time in modern history, an African alliance was coordinating its own satellite communications, intelligence operations, and cyber defense, without foreign oversight. The African Union hadn't approved it, the West hadn't anticipated it, and the old superpowers hadn't infiltrated it. Inside ASCC, data analysts monitored African trade in real time, tracking Afro money flows, border movements, and media manipulation campaigns. They uncovered foreign bots impersonating African citizens to sow division, uncovered encrypted correspondence between European officials discussing economic retaliation strategies, and exposed a shadow financial operation designed to crash Afro money's valuation. Traoré called it Africa's firewall against recolonization, and he wasn't bluffing, because within days of ASCC's activation, Burkina Faso's government leaked a confidential document to international journalists. It showed how several multinational corporations headquartered in France and the UK were actively lobbying their governments to undermine Traoré's plans through embargoes, intelligence warfare, and bribes to regional leaders. The exposé sent shockwaves through the continent, and in that moment, doubts began to dissolve. This wasn't paranoia, this wasn't propaganda. It was real. If you didn't believe before, believe now. The truth isn't just an idea, it's evidence. The leaked documents shattered illusions. Even those who had called Ibrahim Traoré's vision reckless, those in academia, the press, even rival African administrations, were forced to reckon with one undeniable fact. He was right. For decades, African nations had been pawns on a geopolitical chessboard, their minerals extracted, their leaders manipulated, their institutions indebted, and now, with unity within reach, the same forces that once colonized their lands were pulling strings to keep them divided. But the twist didn't end with revelation, it came with rebellion. In Senegal, a coalition of lawmakers called for immediate withdrawal from the CFA franc. In Ethiopia, students occupied the National Reserve Building, demanding Afro money integration. In Cameroon, a former finance minister came out of retirement to join Traoré's Economic Advisory Council. And in Paris, yes, Paris, African migrants rallied outside the National Assembly, chanting, "Traoré did what your leaders feared to dream." Meanwhile, ASCC continued its quiet revolution. A continent-wide intelligence-sharing platform was launched, bypassing colonial-era institutions. The first encrypted African communications satellite, Nyota 1, was launched from a pad in Nigeria, with data centers headquartered jointly in Burkina Faso and Congo. At the center of it all, Traoré refused to gloat. He simply convened a private meeting with his closest allies and said, "They exposed themselves. We didn't win by shouting, we won by standing still while truth caught up." And for the first time, even African leaders who once distanced themselves began calling him not just president, but founder. Founder of what? Not just a movement, not just a nation, a new African order. If you're seeing the truth unfold before the world admits it, then you're ahead of history. Like, share, subscribe. Let them know Africa is not asleep. It's rising. Today, in the schools of Burkina Faso, children no longer learn colonial boundaries as geography. They learn about water tables, solar grids, intercontinental rail systems, and the unity of cultures that once warred under foreign command. In the streets of Bamako, Afro money flows freely, not black market, not underground, but open, regulated, respected, and in the villages of eastern Congo, the sound of construction hums, roads, fiber optics, clean water, all funded not by aid, but by African budgets for African futures. It is not utopia, but it is movement. And at the helm stands a man not trained in diplomacy, but in defiance. A soldier who turned down luxury for legacy, a president who refused to be a puppet, a leader who gave his people not just promises, but power. Ibrahim Traoré stood before the world and said what generations had feared to speak aloud. We did not ask for permission to be free, we stood up to win it. And now, the winds have changed. Africa is no longer waiting. Africa is deciding. HBOB. If the spirit of Ibrahim Traoré touches your heart, Share this story. Subscribe to the channel to continue the journey of an Africa that no longer bows its head. God bless Africa. God bless Burkina Faso. God bless the truth.